call the dog in. There we go. Sorry. You were something about Tyson and then you broke off.
Yeah, so I was saying Tyson was so intrigued by you. It was so speaking so highly of you that I was really looking forward to having that opportunity as well. So thank you.
Thank you for the honor. I mean, never think I have too much to say, but somehow people are interested.
Well, that means that you probably have something to say. So let me frame this for a moment, so that you know what we're doing here and what the question is. So in essence, as you are well aware, we as the species, and specifically we as probably the white males of this species, have really fucked up the situation.
Yeah, that's nice.
And so we seriously need to reconsider basically everything we do, and find new ways of organizing ourselves. There's a lot of people talking about this. There's like Paul Hawken with regeneration, talking about steady state economy, etc. And a lot of thinking, conversation, observation, and just looking at what other people conclude has led me to really believe that there is one really likely way that how we can operate as a species, and that is if we organize in small groups of 1,000 to 4,000 people, we have enough skills to be able to maintain whatever needs to be maintained within that community among the 1,000 people, but we also have still the possibility of governance, right? So we can still hold each other accountable because we know each other. We can look each other in the eye and say, you know, what we have to say, right? And that breaks down at higher scales. And so in groups like that, organizing our livelihood, our physical well-being, and then if we still have the time and the technology and the capacity to do so, we add to that a virtual layer that allows us to have a global conversation, global culture, and global innovation. All of these amazing things that scale brings us. And now this gives rise to several questions. And one question I asked Tyson was, how can we relearn to live with the land? And I mean specifically us weird Westerners, whites, what's the Western, educated, industrialized, etc. So how can we learn to live with the land? And he said, you just have to speak with, how do you pronounce your name?
Michel Grobbe.
Michel. Okay. So yeah, you have to speak with Michel. So that's why we're here. And this is my question. So we will just weave and meander around this question to what is your take on how do we best relearn how to live with the land? That's what I'm curious about.
That's a nice one. Well, for me, the thing is that I think we still know how to live with the land because a lot of knowledge is still here. A lot of traditional ecological knowledge is still around. So if you talk to the elders here, some of them will still remember things. That's one thing. The other thing is listen to it, observing it, sensing it. I mean, in that sense that if I look at the land, I always remember that I am part of it. I'm not different than the land. I'm the same. In that sense, when I'm going outside, you're interacting with the land already immediately. Inside, you're interacting with land immediately. You're always interacting. You're sitting inside, you still hear the birds. They give you alarm calls. They give you the sounds. They tell you what's going on outside. You see the insects. And if you look at those things, then slowly you will relearn what we have lost for in the past. And there are a lot of things are still there. I remember last time I spoke with an elder in Friesland, and he just explained to me how to make what do you call these things in English? Nests for ducks. And how do you do that? And when do you harvest it? What time you harvest it? And how do you apply it then? And how do you have to observe the bird? It lays its eggs. The first 4 eggs you're not going to take. You're taking the 5th egg, and you can take 1 egg each time until there is down in the nest, because then he's going to breed it, and then you leave it alone, and then you have it there. But at the same time, you do something in return. In wintertime, you keep the ice from blocking, and you feed them extra. So there is a relationship there with that little bird, as an example. The same thing happens that if you look at how we used to burn the land, we also used to burn the land in Europe, in the Netherlands. Heathers were burned because of my grandfather even did it, my great-grandfather, sorry. And what you're doing then is you're looking at it and you know what to do in certain places and certain stages, depending on the weather, the environment, the animals that are there, the seasonality, the soil type. And if you start to see the complexity and you start to look at that complexity, then you are reconnecting. The simple thing is, I always say, if you have, if you look at honey production, and it used to be in the past, so you have bees, and you have the European bee, which is almost extinct because of the modern beekeeping. But the old European bees, they were nesting in trees, and there's a relationship with the heather. There's a relationship with certain birds. There's a relationship with the ants. Very simply put, the honeydew that comes of the leaves is a product of, for example, the aphids. And the aphids, they're the forest ants. They store these aphids in wintertime underneath, like alive, like cattle, you know, like a kind of cattle keeping. And then when it's summertime, they just place them on some trees. So the connection with that ant together, with at the same time the honeybee, but also other insects that are there. And these insects are, for example, a food for an almost extinct bird in the Netherlands, because in the beginning of it's I don't know the English name, korhoen. Well, it's a typical bird which lives on heather. And what happens is that when they're very young, in the first stages, they eat insects. After that, they have a diet of plants. So you need those insects there in order to get that. But that means that the heather needs to be different. You have to have young heather, old heather, different ages. That means you need to burn, and you need to have some grazing. And for me, I always look at the perspective from us as humans. We are here as ecosystem engineers. Look, we're like beavers, you know. And the good thing is, if we are good enough, then you change your environment in such a way that other species are also gaining from that. If you harvest from a tree, you look at it in such a way that if you harvest it, you harvest the dead branches, and you take another piece of it in such a way that the cut is nicely to the south, so it dries in nicely. So you look at the tree, and if you harvest something, the tree has to be better off than when you didn't. And you also have something. So there's this reciprocity in it.
So you clearly know how to read the nature you out there. I would be lost, right? Because I don't have the knowledge of all of these little hints and details and the interconnectedness. I can, in an abstract way, understand that, but in a lived way, I need to learn it.
Yes.
And I guess you didn't fall out of the sky knowing all of this. So somehow you also learned all of that. How did that happen?
Basically, it started when I was a kid.
Mhm.
It started with my parents. It started with my grandparents. It started with my family, in such a thing. It started with talking to people who were living on the land still, talking to old forest keepers. When I was a kid, for example, my father was in the military, but I was also in holidays. I was in the field there, running around and talking to these gamekeepers and all these people, and they were teaching me things. And then you observe, and then you listen, and then you start to apply that knowledge.
Mhm.
Of course, and then I started to study at university first, biology. So that's also a background that I have in biology, ecology. And the older I got, the more I saw that these ecology models are not correct. It's well, they're correct, but you're missing parts
Mhm.
in such a way, because in the field I saw different things than the model explained. So that's something that you then to pick up, and then you talk to other people who still have the skills of beekeeping, skills of making baskets, skills of tracking,
Mhm.
trailing animals.
Mhm.
Animals taught me a lot also.
Mhm.
I've learned a lot of, for example, a fox has taught me a lot about how a scent works in the landscape.
Mhm.
So I listened, I read the fox who was walking in the snow, and when he was walking, I saw that he was looking to the side from his tracks. I also saw that he was every time I saw him do that, and then I lowered myself to that height, and I
Mhm.
started to look, and what happens here?
Mhm.
And then I
Mhm.
felt an air current, and then I saw that he was actually checking in the landscape. You have those airflows coming by in
Mhm.
certain spots of the land, depending on the species of plants, depending on the soil, which is heating up and cooling down. So you get these air currents,
Mhm.
and he was checking that out. So he was literally walking through the sandscape of the landscape.
Mhm.
And that taught me something about how that removed. That taught me something how I could find a wolf,
Mhm.
for example, here in the Netherlands, because it behaved much the same. So
Mhm.
the first wolf that was on camera was of a camera that I placed there together with another guy, based upon that knowledge.
Mhm.
But that
Mhm.
knowledge was taught to me by a fox.
Mhm.
Um,
But
so
you knew how to read it, right?
yeah, yeah,
So you were already on the lookout for these types of signals. You knew
yes,
how to how to interpret what the fox was trying to show you, right?
and that's thankful to my dad, who pointed tracks out to me when I was a kid walking, and he was pointing out, this is, what is this? This is, oh, this is a road there that walked here. This is this. This is something else. So,
Mhm.
um, and then it continues, and then it's, for me, it's also a big part is using your senses to get the information that you need from the landscape. If I see when it's going to rain, you can see that the ants will tell you when it rains, the flies will tell you when it's going to rain,
Mhm.
and when it's very close to a lot of drops going down, and you have
Mhm.
these dragonflies, they will just, before the heavy rain, they'll just go somewhere and sit at the side of a leaf downwards hanging, so that they don't catch all the rain. So when I see that, I know it's time to put on my jacket, because it's going to rain within a few minutes. But that's because of observation. That's because of looking, and I think everybody can learn that. But you need to start to open yourself up to it.
If you
And
have you seen somebody like a imagine this typical city dweller somewhere? Have you seen somebody learn that and really start understanding that firsthand?
well, I'm well. My students, for example, I'm teaching. I'm a lecturer at an agricultural at University of Applied Sciences,
Mhm. Mhm.
and when I take people, the first thing I do is usually I take them outside, and then I'm just telling what I'm seeing, what I'm listening for. I'm hearing
Mhm.
this, and sometimes I'm even explaining something, or I'm showing something, and then I hear, for example, the alarm calls of certain birds in the end, and then I say, okay, what's this? There's coming. There's going to be, judging by it, there's going to be a hawk flying over. And if
Mhm.
that happens, people are going, whoa, how did you know? Yeah, that's quite easy, because you can learn the language of that bird.
Mhm.
Um, so pick a bird, learn that language. It's something that was done ages ago. It's easy uh, when you listen, but also look at your own dog. If you want to learn tracking, I always say you can learn from your dog a lot. You can
Mhm.
learn from the sheep in the meadow a lot. Animals teach you. Um,
But it takes
And
time, right? So you pick
yes, it takes time.
a teacher. So
Yep.
let's say you pick the dog or a
Hmm.
bird and
Or human. Yeah.
or human, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have to follow that teacher for a while.
Yes.
How long would you say would it take me to learn what a bird has to tell me?
If you're focusing on one or two and you're going into a relationship with it, you will
Mhm.
learn quickly. You probably already know if you have the blackbird in your country, and you do. You already know when the cat comes what sound it makes,
Mhm. Mhm.
probably. And then if you know that, and if you start paying attention to it, so start paying attention to your senses,
Mhm.
you will get into that rhythm of the landscape. And then slowly you add something more. So it takes, I can't tell because people are learning at different rates. So how long it takes, I can never tell. But if you start to see those patterns, you also understand, hey, there's a lot of noise over there. And there's the little blackbird, the little how do you call it in English, blue tits, and the black tips. They're over there. There's a lot of noise. That means there are insects down there.
Mhm. Mhm.
Ah, and now let me see how that works. So if you start to ask yourself questions, um,
Okay,
and
so
and then you're starting to see things. If I take students to a tree and I said, okay, what is this tree telling you about what it needs at this moment? You want to have something from the tree. Now what is it telling you? What can you give, and then take. And then when we were doing that, I explained something about the nice cutting line, because that's the best way to get rid of the water so it doesn't rot in, etc. And then I showed them the stick that a beaver carved, biting it. It has the same curvature, and it was already known by our ancestors. I mean, our ancestors did the same thing. They were traveling with the hazelnuts, because hazelnut was a staple, and they did it in the Stone Age, and the hazelnuts are everywhere.
Mhm.
So it's something that if you start to see those patterns, you start to see those things everywhere. So when I take that beaver stick and I show them the cut of the
Mhm.
beaver, and it's the same angle,
Mhm.
they're going like, ah. And then if you take them to that piece of forest where the beavers are, or the forest, it's not a forest, but the place where the beavers are, and you look at the willow trees, and then you see that they are really coppicing. They're like coppicing the terrain like that. They do that because they want to have those nice, fresh little shoots because of the bark that they eat.
Mhm.
Um, we did the same. My grandfather did the same. He coppiced the things to get material for baskets, materials for your tools, for your hedges, for everything.
Mhm.
So we're not that different. We're the same. And we used to have all these things around. We in the Netherlands, we used to have a lot of those what they call in Dutch geriefbosjes, which are places where people did some management, but the management was for them to get, for example, berries, food, but also wood, etc. And in
Mhm.
such a way that it is also beneficial for the birds. It was
Mhm.
beneficial for the insects, and
Mhm.
it was beneficial because you had those traveling lines to the landscape. And it popped up at certain places because those places were the best for it. So then they let it grow there, and then they made it over there. And that is something that has changed in modern times because people just started to get those big scale systems. And then we're surprised that the animals are gone. That's not surprising. We're not taking our role again. We have to take our
Mhm.
role.
Mhm. Okay. Our role as the meta beaver, the super beaver.
Yes, as an ecosystem engineer, because that's
Yeah.
that's something I think humans are good at, and we can if we look
That's
with the correct eyes.
But that's very interesting. An ecosystem engineer needs to have an embodied sense of the system, right?
Sorry.
Needs to have an embodied sense of the system,
Yes.
and so people are really good at systems if they have grown up embedded in them. So like
Mhm.
let's say a social system. Everybody can deal with a family. No computer ever could deal with a family because it's just too
Mhm.
complex, right?
Yes.
And in the same sense, you have grown that embodied knowledge of the system of nature, and more than that, you have also grown a way to continuously learn how to evolve that knowledge.
Yes.
Um, and but in our cultures, or in our Western culture, we have systematically unlearned that.
Yes, indeed.
So
Yes.
so when people are confronted with systems, they're overwhelmed. They don't know how to start thinking about them, how to when to pass the threshold of trusting the intuition that you have about the system, and when to still gather information about the system, right? Can you do you have a sense, or do you have a language to explain to people when can you be confident enough to know that you've grasped enough of the system for you to
By,
be able to deal with it?
by observing and listening. That's the only thing I do.
Mm-hmm.
And um, because if you when you take out an activity and you observe afterwards, it will tell you what you did right or what you did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes time. I mean, I agree on that. But then it's also no, the cat's coming in, but the cat's also, for example, if you look at an animal, it learns by observing,
Mm-hmm.
and it learns patterns by observing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing. If you change, if you, for example, you start to coppice, first of all, you look at the landscape, and then you look at natural landscapes that are already there, and you look at that, and you go, okay. For example, if I go to a terrain where the beaver has been, and I see how the layout is, and I see which is very rich, which is biodiversity rich, and I go like, okay, this and this happened. Let's try to start that over here, see what happens then. And if that happens, it teaches me that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have that pattern in your system.
So you actively
and
run
you
tests.
listen.
You
Yes,
actively run tests. Okay.
and you run tests. And what you also do, you listen to those people who still have some of the knowledge, which is still there, because there's still a lot of knowledge. If you talk to people who are who are still doing agricultural work even 1 or 2 generations ago, they still have a lot of knowledge about how to fish, how to work with the ducks, how to work with the geese, how to use the land, in which way to use the land. And you listen to that too, and then you look at what happens. So it's constantly listening, looking, looking. So the first thing you need to do is to slow down, because we're always running. When I walk in the forest with my students, I always have to run for some reason, and then I also back to relax. You're going far too fast. If you slow down, when you walk in a normal pace, it's very slow indeed. But then you see everything. Then you look to the left, to the right, then you see the deer lying there. Then you see that the wind is blowing in such a way that you have to take into account the wind direction, because if you want to see those butterflies, it will be over there because the sun is over there. That will heat the soil over here. That means that you get a current over there. That will mean people traveling that way. But it can only be seen when you slow down and when you take peace in your own mind, and the willingness to listen, and make a connection. I mean, and it's sometimes very painful. I remember now, for example, in the Netherlands, they are doing there's the regulation of the wild boar, because the people say there are a lot of wild boar, too many, because of the landscape, all those reasons, and they're shooting a lot of them, but they're forgetting things. They're forgetting that wild boar. I know one family of wild boar for a long time now, and they were when they started this year, they had 25, approximately the group was 25 animals, and the piglets, a few of them died because of the wet weather, and a few were there. And now what they are doing, those pigs, they know their landscape. They have a culture there. They know where to go, where not to go. And there are those unwritten rules that they follow. What you now see, for example, is because of the hunting and the overhunting, what I'm saying now is overhunting, is that there's only one left. If that one is being shot also, then that knowledge system from that pig within that area is gone. Then new pigs are coming in, and those new pigs, they will have to figure out that same way. So they will bring a lot of problems. They will go into gardens, they will do this, they will do that. And people are not thinking about that. They're just saying, well, the carrying capacity of this land is so many animals, so we have to do this. And I'm saying, no, it's complexer than that. If you look at animals, then you see that you have extrovert animals, introvert animals. And what you're doing by hunting is first you select the extrovert animals, and then you get the introvert animals to stay, which means that what you get is animals that are frightened of people.
Mm.
And then we say animals are wild. No, we created that because of the way we hunt. Because if you look at some research that's being done, for example, with farm foxes, you see that if you select on introvertness or an extrovertness, you get a different population.
Okay.
And that population works differently within an area. But I also say you have to think, if you look at deer, which deer, if you look at the landscape, something is happening over there, something is happening over there. That group of deer does a really good job in something. Like say it's coppicing some species that need to be coppiced. If you shoot them, that culture will be gone. I've noticed that, for example, that in some areas in the Netherlands, in the more marshy areas, the roe deer have a preference for certain species of plants, and a completely different preference in the Veluwe, another area. That's culture. And if you read that and you take that into account, then you can work with together in working with the landscape.
You make it sound really easy.
Okay, well, the problem is that the different thing is that humans don't always see it. My frustration is always, at the moment, I see this, but you need people to listen, and people are thinking fast. They're thinking from their mobile phones. I mean, the second brain became the mobile phone is the second brain of most people. And what they do is, if you get to hear that the animal is doing this and this over and over again, our brain says, oh, that must be true. So the repetition of things that are thrown out in the bubble where people are in are telling them something, and then they start to believe it's real, because that's how our brain works. So it's not that easy. It is easy, but to get other people involved and to see that same pattern from a different perspective, there are a lot of extra things coming in. It's economy that comes in. It's the way people look at nature. What is their background? Are they a participant in nature, or do they see themselves as custodians, or do they see themselves as rulers? Or these are all different perspectives that have to be taken into account. It's actually the same as nature.
Also the level of abstraction through reductionism, because
Yes.
if you want to understand nature, you by definition have to reduce it. And what you're describing is that I don't know what the size of a good bioregion is. Probably it's species dependent. But it could be very tiny, right? And in order to really learn that, which is entirely different from something somewhere else on the planet or just around the corner, you have to take the time, and you cannot reduce it.
No.
So this ability to continue to embrace the complexity and the uncertainty that comes with it sounds to me like it's a key element in this, and a key learning in this, that you come in there knowing nothing, that you accept maybe the process of experimentation and listening and observing, and using all of your senses, smelling, etc. But and then just taking time to really get to know what's happening here. And that means years, right? Because you have to go through all of the cycles several times, I guess.
Yes, I agree on that. You have to follow the cycles more than 1 year, because the complexity is within a very long time period. So if there are people who are still remembering things, then I ask them from that region, because they know. In the Netherlands, we have people who have been living in certain areas for a long time. And if you start to talk to people who are around their 80s now, they know a lot. They still know a lot. But people are not asking. But as soon as you ask them, it's like a waterfall of information coming in. It's like, wow, we did this, we used to do this, and the way and then you go like, whoa. So there is all of that is there. So it's not like that you're going in blank. It's like you have. I learned that. Then I went
If you're
in.
in the country, if you're in the city, I
Yes.
would doubt that, right? So
Depending on where you are in the city. If you're in the suburbs or in the center, that's a big difference. I agree on that.
okay. I'm envisioning the center, city center, and so let's say roughly 25% of the global population lives in something like that, fully lost touch with anything that you're describing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then another 25% is around the city, so they could have the chance to still learn that, and the rest knows it, but their tendency is towards the city. So
yeah, but still, I think I've been if you're in the center of a city, there are still rhythms. There is still the same way. If you look at, we are being taught in the Eurocentric way of thinking. It's basically linear thinking. That's also what you're being taught at school. So it's a conditioning that goes on. And I say it's not bad. I mean, if I have a flat tire, I love it to be very linear. But in the other things, I need to learn to think complex, and we don't teach that. But if you're in a city, you're actually doing the same thing, because even there's nature, because I think we're nature, so everything we have is nature also. And sometimes I tell my students, the car, is that nature? No, it's not nature. Well, for me, it comes from this earth. So what's the difference? And it goes back to this earth, same way. Only it takes a longer time and a longer cycle to become earth again, in the sense that we think of earth. But so it's still there, and it's the only thing is, listen. In the center of the city, I never forgot. I was sitting there in Den Haag. I never forget that. I was sitting there, and at a certain moment, it was in the middle of the city, and I was there, and I had to wait for an appointment. And I was sitting on a small bench in a very small patio where a few trees were and a few things, nothing much, but it was in the middle of the city. There were insects. And at a certain moment, there flew birds by. I heard them scream, and I looked up. There you are, guys. And at the same time, I heard the ambulance going. I thought, oh, something's going on over there. And at the same time, I heard. So for me, it's the same pattern that you have in the city, because we're the same species.
So that's very interesting. So you could use, because somebody in the city is very used to dealing with all of those complexities and reading all of those signals. Otherwise, you won't survive very long. So transferring that idea of that you already understand complex systems, as I said earlier, your family, but also your city.
Yes.
And all you have to do is embed yourself in a new system. You will do the exact same things, and you will learn. Right?
You can observe.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I think we are hardwired as a species. We are hardwired to understand this, because otherwise we wouldn't have survived for this period of time. If you're unable to work within this complexity of the landscape, you wouldn't survive. And for me, the city is just another landscape. I remember that years ago I went to Berlin, and there was this the forester of Berlin. And I made an appointment with this guy, because I thought forester in Berlin, and I was a young kid I was a young guy back then. And he was there, and he said, "Oh, let's go on this evening. Let's go into to Berlin city. Let's see the wildlife." There were wild boar running around there. There was a fox who was capable of who had their young in kindergartens, because in the holidays there's nobody there, so the young could be safely grown, and then they could go out. So they adapted immediately. Birds adapt to it. Also, all these species adapt at the same way as we adapt. But the same thing happened when I talked to him. He said, "Yeah, we have tried to catch some of the wild boar and place them into the forest. They died." Because they couldn't survive with that system anymore. And that taught me a lot also in my thinking, like, they have to relearn. That's what I told before. If you have an area, the living organisms there have adapted to it. They have a culture there, more or less. And if you take that away, that culture is gone for a time. And before that is restored, that takes some time. That's a bigger cycle. in the entire system. I mean, as humans, we have always migrated. We have always been migrants, but also animals have always migrated. Birds have always migrated. Plants have always migrated. Some traveling slow, some traveling fast, some are traveling through. But it's the same cycle. Only some cycles are thousands of years or hundreds of years, and some cycles are just seasonality. But it's basically a way of looking, observing, sensing, and thinking. The biggest thing I always say to my students now is you need to approach two ways of thinking. And it first starts with nature time and clock time.
Okay.
There's a big difference, especially in teaching settings, for example. You need to have a roster. You need to learn this. You need to do this at this time. You start at this moment. You have an appointment at this time, this goes happens, blah, blah. Try that outside in the field.
That doesn't work.
Yes, that doesn't work like that because in one area the berries are ripe in a certain period of time, and in another area the same tree flowers completely different. But I have to know that because that tells me something about when I can harvest the bark for making things. So it's a different way of thinking, and it's and that's teachable. You can teach people to I always say to deconditioning yourself, because you're conditioned in thinking linearly. And now the only thing you need to do is to get out of that conditioning and start to see the bigger picture, which you already do unconsciously.
So one way of teaching it, I guess, would then be making that conscious, right? So that people are become aware that they're already doing this.
Yes.
How do you achieve that? So what is or is there a moment that when you interact with, for example, your students, where you notice that something clicks and now they start seeing this in a different way? How would you describe that moment?
The first click is the moment that they are in a relationship with the landscape, and that pops up. I remember a lady who was always observing a certain part because of assignments that I gave, a certain part of a park, and then she came to the lesson, and she was pissed. She was really pissed. And I asked, "Why are you so pissed?" "They hurt my birch tree. They took away a piece of bark." And I said to her, "Your birch tree?" Well, it's in a park, but it's my birch tree now. So she connected with that landscape. She connected with that area. Another student came to me and said, "This was the first time that I was sitting 2 meters away from a hawk. And he was looking at me and I was looking at him. And that had to do because I was walking in the rhythm of the land." Click. That's when I see those click moments. And the other click moments, that take longer, because the first thing I think is people need to go into to first learn about yourself, and then learn about the relationships that you have with all the organisms. And from that, you can go into communities, you go into other systems.
So that
But first you need to connect.
Maybe that's where the whole cycle starts, right? The connection with oneself.
Yes.
That is so hard for so many people. That relearning or learning to listen to yourself first. How do you help people do that?
Well, it took some time for me first. That was experience. Life experience taught me a few things. How do I do that? Slowing down. I think the biggest thing I'm trying to do with people is slowing down. If I teach, at least when I'm teaching the subjects that I like to teach, I teach them outside. So the classroom is the environment where you're in. And the first time people are coming in, they're going, "What do I need to do? What do I need to do?" And then relax, slow down. And first, as soon as you sit and start to talk slowly and start to go into another rhythm, and it's not bad to talk fast, because if you're enthusiastic, it's good, because that's the rhythm that you have. But be aware what your rhythm does. And then what you see is, I hear something. And the only thing I point out is, I hear something there. I remember when I was teaching a long time ago. I was teaching at a secondary school biology, and I was still, it was in Arnhem, and it was a school building which had 3 layers. And I was teaching on the top layer and had the windows open, and there was a march at the side, and I heard an alarm call of 2 birds. And I was teaching, and I was talking, and I was walking to the window. And I looked outside, and I saw a wren hopping and going there, and I saw another robin jumping up, doing the same. And then I thought, oh, let's go to the window, guys, because I think because the height they're jumping, there must be a kind of a small ermine or something like that jumping around. So I took the glass to the window, and they were seeing that. And at that moment, there was a small weasel crossing the how do you call that, the fietspad, the cycling lane. They was crossing there, and they were going, wow. But that's observing, listening, and even when you're teaching, listening. I had a colleague of mine who says, when you're teaching, you're still listening. Yes, but that's automatically. I remember that I was driving on a highway one day, and I was like, we were allowed to drive 130 kilometers an hour. Now it's 100, but okay, no worries. And I think I drove like 120 or something, or 110. And in my corner of my eye, there was a color piece of fur, and I passed it, and I was like, it doesn't match the environment. So I turned off the highway, started to drive again, missed the spots all where it were, started to drive again, stopped, and I found a piece of tail and a piece of hind of a pine marten, which was traveling through, because they were not in that area. Now they are, but back then they weren't. That means that somehow unconsciously something clicked in my mind when I was driving there. Hey, there's something strange on there. That doesn't fit into the pattern that is normal while I'm driving here. And I think everybody knows that, because when people are driving, they immediately see when there are cops looking with lasers how fast you're speeding. So you're doing that already. Only now it's applied to something, and that's something about your brain, your search image. If you take people out to search for fossils, for example, the first thing you find is something you'll keep on finding, and you'll be frustrated because the other guy's finding, I don't know, shark tooths, and you're only finding ignos or whatever, you know. And that's, if you're aware of that, you can change.
John Vervaeke would call that the salience landscape, right?
Yes.
And the question that arises out of that is, how do you consciously take? Oh, let me step one back to explain some context here. But so a lot of the things we do on autopilot, because they're embedded in our system one, to use Daniel Kahneman language, as heuristics, and we navigate through life, and it works most of the time. But it is not aligned with what we would like to do, or what we know is the right thing to do. And especially in times like this, where we need to do more things right than wrong, this is very important to get the heuristics in your system one aligned with your intentions in system two, which then means that you have to be very clear about the direction of your system two. What is it that you want to see in the world?
Yes.
And then tighten the loop between the OODA loop, the measure, the feedback loop, to really tighten how you act in the world. So that feeling of what is my right direction is maybe the hardest to get, because that's where it starts, right?
True.
So I'm curious, how do you know what is the right direction?
Well, then there's something about right and wrong, because that's quite linear. Something can be lighter, something can be heavier. It's also a way of approaching it. But it's something that also goes with. Now maybe I can translate it to nature. it's something out of your comfort zone sometimes. You know it's right, but it's out of your comfort zone. That means that you need to learn how to approach that feeling and how to step a little bit out of your comfort zone, and then we're back into your comfort zone. What most people do is they either step fully out of it and then they get frustrated, but they're not most people have fear at all, so they don't go out of the comfort zone. And the ones that do, if you make a small step and you step back, you start to get the feeling for it. Okay, now it feels good. You start a bigger step, and it's the same way if you would approach an animal. If I would like to for example be very close contact with deer, what you do is letting the animal learn to trust you. And what you then do is there are certain circles about where it acknowledges you that you're there. You can see it, and then what you're doing is, I'm here. No, acknowledge me. I'm here. I don't want to disturb you. So you read the animal. You go one step, and then you see it's getting a little bit. Then you go a little step back, and then you see it relax, and then you start doing the things that relaxes it. It's the same metaphor. It's the same way for yourself. You step out of it, heavy, and take your time to restore your energy, because otherwise it doesn't work. You burn out. So you need to have that same rhythm in order to feel what is correct for your path to follow. And the mirror is out there. It's the people. It's the landscape. It is the animals that inhabit it. I always say to people, when you go into the forest, you're stressed. The birds will tell you. First warning is that they stop what they're doing. The second thing is that they go away from you because you're too fast. You're not in balance. If a bird stays there and sees you and stays where it is while you pass, because he has a personal zone, so you don't get in the personal zone, of course. But when you stay out of that personal zone and you can pass and it stays relaxed, then you're in the right rhythm. Then you are there where you are. That's what you are. If I work with horses, a horse is the biggest mirror ever that you can have. But also dogs. Dogs are your mirrors. If you're coming from your work, you're frustrated and you have a dog at home, I can tell you, you know, because the dog is getting frustrated too. Its behavior changes. That's your mirror. Sit down, relax. Oh, wait a second, it's me. What am I doing? You go and you have it's going to be quick. I have to do this and I have to do that, and I want to ride a horse. That horse will say, well, that's not a good idea. You want to catch me? Catch me first. Bye-bye. You know, these are mirrors. And that happens with every animal, even insects. I last time, the funny thing is I showed a student of mine how you could approach a dragonfly easily and then let it sit on your hand in peace, because you are not, you're part of the environment. And if you're part of it, you're living in it. And then they say, you belong to the system. I'm here. There you go. Sitting there. If you sit against a tree and you have wild boar roaming around you and you start to think, oh boy, this is a wild boar, they're dangerous. Yes, there's something happening. If you just relax, they will pass, they will sniff, they will know, and they'll see, okay, you're there. And then sometimes I talk, sometimes I do not talk, to let them know that I'm here. People were looking strangely at me when I started to talk to a big group of deer. The reason why I did it was I don't want to spook them. I'm here. Yo. And they're going like, oh, you're there. Okay, good. And then there was a car stopping a little bit further up the road, and they were immediately gone into because that's unpredictable. I don't want to be unpredictable. I'm part of this system. I'm here. You know, it's maybe it's a bit of a strange answer, but I think that's something that you need to be aware of. But also, if you go in a group of people, read people, because some people are very uncomfortable when you're coming in. So what can you do with your body language to relax them? Because that's something that I think you should do, because you want an environment where there is a certain kind of balance within, because nothing is in balance. Everything is changing every time, but there's a certain bigger loop in balance. So try to get that into it.
What I'm hearing is that your teaching is the same as your learning, just from the other direction, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. So it is slow. Has to be slow.
Yes. It has to be experimental. You have to do it yourself. You have to learn. You have to do it with your heart. You have to have an emotional connection to it.
Now, now what I'm trying to do in my head while I'm listening is I get the sense of what you're describing, and I feel this urgency that is not slow, that we now somehow need to get many people into a mode like that. And I'm wondering, and I'm trying to listen for things you say that might give hints as to how we can do this contradiction of the slowness and the listening with scale, with the scale that we need to, and the speed we need to turn this ship around. And
for me, the thing that pops up in my mind is look at the wind, how the wind travels through the trees and through the landscape. Before it's a storm, things happen. So you need to have certain things going on before it can change something in the landscape.
Okay.
And sometimes that means that if you have a forest where you cut half of it off and you leave some trees there, then you know that the forest will collapse. That's a natural system when it's applied in another system. So for me, it's if you would want to change something, you need to first see. You need to change first. That's one thing. So the change starts with one person at first, and then what I see is that ripples around and around, and you get this whirlwind idea. You know, the ancient symbol. These are an ancient symbol of that. It's like the spiral. I think that is it, because you need to have that spiral, but then you have to position the spirals in such a way that the wind travels into the right direction. But that's different for each region. I think the best thing that when people once ask me, what's the best thing you could do? Connect with your landscape where you walk. Because people will see something is changing. And I believe that then you get an attraction from people because they're interested. People want this, you know. People don't want to be fast running and the society is getting faster and faster. People want to slow down. And if they see people who do that, and if they see how that works and what it does for them, then you get this attractive idea of, hey, I want to change too, in that sense. But it needs to come from inside. But that means that you still have to have peace in your mind, because the mind is always traveling very quickly. But I don't have a fit answer to change things fast, because everything needs its time.
Well,
and I understand the urgency, because I feel it too. Because I mean, it's something that's also in my mind. I'm frustrated by the fact how wildlife management is done in the Netherlands at the moment. I'm frustrated by the fact how they empty ditches the way they do that. So there is a lot of that's in me too, you know.
Maybe there's an analogy in something else, because I like using that when people say that things take time. Yes, true. Sometimes things take time, but then they happen very suddenly. So it's not
tipping point. Yeah,
exactly. So falling in love requires you to have like a small up ramp, but at one point there's a tipping point where you notice, right? Then it switches into a different mode. You start seeing that person differently. Your body starts producing different drugs for you to see the world differently. All of that happens, right? And it's one moment where that starts happening.
When I have to classify that, I would say there's only one moment: that's connecting to one organism, which is not, which is a wild organism, for example. I think most people who are interested in nature have some experience in nature that changed them quickly. And if you have a bird landing on you, that changes you immediately. If you have a red deer sitting next to you, grazing or something like that, that changes you. So I think it's in relation. It's in connecting. These two things, if you can get that gun done, you have it. Because that changes your mind. Then you see, for example, if you connect to an animal, you don't just see a deer, you see an individual. And you start to approach it on an individual basis. And then you have a kind of kingship relation to it, because you're feeling related, because you see patterns that are the same in your life. And then you have that connection. And if that connection is there, you're willing to do something for the other. And that can go quick and it can go slow. Depends on how you do it. The one things that I still remember is a very simple thing that I did once. Was next to the bird feeder, you place a chair and you put some clothing over it. Because birds have learned to mistrust us because of all the history that we have for a long time. But they need to trust us. But I want them to trust at a certain place. And then you sit in those closings and they're like, oh yeah, that's the same pattern in the landscape. And then the smell is the same. All right. So I'm coming close to you. And when you sit in between them, you start to become part of it. And it changes the way you look at things.
So experiences with nature.
Yes.
And at the same time, you say nature is everywhere. So people can have that experience wherever they are. I remember I had a very, very fun experience with a fox many years ago. I was at a concert. It was I don't know, Morchiba or Massive Attack or I don't know, and I'd smoked too much weed, and they started the concert with these intense lights coming into the audience and one big sound, and I just couldn't take it. After a couple of they did this for like minutes, and I just couldn't take it. So I went outside, and there was this hall throbbing with sound and people and all of it. And just like 20 meters away from that, under a tree, there was a fox. And we made connection that night. That was incredible. It was in the middle of a city, right? It was in Cologne, in Germany. That was intense. I really had that connection that you're talking about then. So it's doable everywhere. Yeah.
But even with insects, I mean, I remembered that there was a bumblebee who was exhausted, by the way, and there was something that you can feed them some sugar water, and then they relate to you, because if you move your finger, they're in threat modus. If they sense you for a little while, they know you're not threat and you're feeding them, it's okay, and then they fly off. But it was in the middle of the schoolyard. So first of all, people look like, hey, you're crazy, you bumblebee, come on, they're being break. But then they saw what was happening, and I explained to them what was happening. I said, look, when I'm doing this, it's going to recognize my scent. So I have again, and if I'm keeping my finger here, it has time to adjust to the situation. It's like the same thing that I said. You go to these different zones again, and then it's there, and then I can feed him without him having stress. He can fill up, and then it was off. Those are just simple things. There's a simple thing that is already giving you a relationship to something. If you're standing in a heather field, or if you're standing in a city wall, you have those lizards which are in cities, muurhagedissen we call them. If it's a cold day and you're warm, your body is really warm, they will come to you because they want to heat up with you. So sit to that wall, let that little fella run over you, and let him sit. That gives you a connection. That is, for me, that's a connection that goes like very deep.
So maybe one could tap into this meditation mindfulness wave that is that so many people are riding, where instead of connecting with yourself, which is what you do most of the time with your own breath, something like that, you start connecting with another being.
Yes.
And that is the purpose of the exercise.
I think that would be a very good one. Yes.
Yeah.
And the same thing what I tell my students is, if you go through an animal and you have something in mind, your non-verbal body language is such that it knows. It reads you better than anything else.
Mhm.
And I mean, so let go of what you want.
Mhm.
Just be.
Mhm.
Just be with your senses, your smell, your
Mhm.
hearing. And that means that because that animal is in the same state, it's with its senses. And then just see where's the comfort line and how can we get to common ground and then connect. I think
Mhm.
that's mindfulness, basically, more or less.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, yeah. I have a friend. He tried to explore mindfulness. When he talks about spirituality, he says the S word, because he's so opposed.
Mm.
And but for some reason he decided, and so he was asking several people, what's the best mindfulness app out there? And he lives on a farm, and I know he sometimes just goes out into the nature and just stands there for 15 minutes and just absorbs nature. I say, you don't need an app. All you need to do is go out there and
Right,
stand,
exactly,
right?
exactly. Yes.
Um, and I think that's also very interesting, that these ideas of, let's say a concert, a classical concert, for example, or you go there, you sit there for 2 hours, 3 hours, and you listen. That is meditation. And we've lost a lot of that, because we fragmented the listening time. We used to listen to LPs and actually turn them around. Now you don't even listen to the end of the song, right? My
Yeah,
son, he says, okay, after like 1 minute, now that's enough. Let's skip to the next song. Um,
that's true.
yeah, so we're stripping
Slowing
ourselves of
again,
these.
slowing down.
Yeah, exactly. Listen to the whole fucking album, please,
Yeah,
right?
take time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's. I think if you look at for me, that's one of the best. No, I think that's one of the main things to do. Relax and take time, and forget that feeling of hurry that we have.
Mhm,
We have tried to somehow. I think Western society has embraced that feeling of hurry. You
mhm,
need to. If you don't feel it, it's not good. You
mhm,
have to do
mhm,
something
mhm,
instead of relaxing and going with the flow. Um, I mean, I remember that I was looking at water, and if you look at the flow of water, and you look at the stream underneath, and the stream in the middle, and the stream up,
mhm,
if you look long enough, you go like, oh wow, this is going that way. That water is going that way. Hey, wow, the water is in layers, which moves opposite around, and that's why the fish are there. And then you're like in your mind, but also you're in you're off. You don't think about anything, and you're slowing down in the rhythm of the water and the fish.
mhm, mhm,
And the colder it is, the slower they are. So I always say when it's cold, I love to go outside because then you slow down even more.
mhm.
Uh,
It's a bit like when people go, sailing or skiing or golfing. It's a activity in nature, and it's also, um, easy enough so that it, occupies a certain portion of your mind enough that, satisfies this need of doing something, and, at the same time, there's nothing else you can do, right? Which allows you to open up to nature, especially something like sailing, at least for me.
but
Um,
the same thing is doing a traditional craft.
mhm,
If you harvest material for making a basket or making something for what I like to do is these duck curves, because it's something that you place into nature and animals have also something from it. But when you're working on that craft, you're within the rhythm of slowly doing it. You do at least I always do it outside. You do it
mhm,
outside, and then you're listening. And if you're working with another craft like a basket making, or it's slowing you down.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
If it's a sport like sailing that you said,
mhm,
it's slowing you down.
mhm.
Yeah, it's something that I can relate to.
And so there's I'm one of my projects has a lot to do in Africa, and, one of the questions there is, how to make, um, staying local and, living with the land, mm, being a farmer, can be more attractive to young people than going to the city.
True.
And that is a really difficult question, because you don't have the or you're up against the power of Disney and Netflix, showing the good world to be a world with an SUV and this and that and the other. And that's what you're up against. Unless somebody has an experience like that. So to me, this boils down to the question of what is the minimum configuration inside of a system 2, to pick up that language again, that allows somebody to log out of the Netflix Disney kind of worlds and into a connected kind of world. So what is that spark that is in somebody that allows them to take this direction?
If I look at my daughter, for example, and if she looks at her phone, and from the corner of her eye, she sees the squirrel eating, that phone is gone. The squirrel's there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, she has a little bit of a debt, probably, bit of thing. But I see that with other people too.
Mm.
If something is going on in which is interesting enough,
Mm-hmm.
they go away from it. People have. There was I remember the people were sitting. Was at I think it was at the university also. People were all inside, and I was outside. And there were a lot of swallows flying around because they were trying to get themselves ready to go south again. And then one of them looked outside. They were with their computers, they were with everything. And he saw all those swallows circling around and around, they're close by around, and he came out. He left that, he came out, to stand there. It was one observation, one thing that triggered outside, and then, whoa, this is beautiful. And then it was hard for him to go back in. But it's a tough question, because I think it's different for everybody. I've been pounding around that question a lot. How can I, especially as a teacher, how can I facilitate the learning process in such a way that they can connect with themselves and connect with their environment, the landscape, and everything else? That question is constantly in my mind.
Well, a friend of mine has a very simple answer. He gives them a very heavy backpack and sends them up the hill. When you've done that for a day, you really know what you've done. You really feel your body, and there's nothing left, right? And then you sit in nature, and then you automatically connect because there's nothing else to do, right?
True.
So
the thing that I always have with that is that if you return, that memory stays for a short period of time, and it fades away. And for me, it's if you have an emotion connected to it, and sometimes there is an emotion connected, and that's that also. Huh? So I'm not saying that's not the case. But if you have a really strong emotion connected to it, then it will be in your mind for a long time. A certain smell will trigger that again. Certain sound will trigger it again. So I always say it needs to have. If you connect, you have to do it with emotion, and not only with your ratio, but for especially also with your emotion, with your heart. Because
I call that the soul set shift. Right? So you can do as much of a mindset shift as you want, but unless you have a soul set shift as well, you will not change the way you do things.
Soul shift, yeah, I agree.
And I agree that this is hard and it's very individual, but I think the pattern is not individual. I think the pattern is the same.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
But it also probably has to do with try and error and with time.
Yes.
And we're good at that. I believe that we actually know how to do this, because an average human takes 400 attempts before they can take the first step. Right? Talk about experimentation. So So if we can have that perseverance, then the spark of that is somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I call that curiosity, but then there's this other points where, as you say, people don't leave the comfort zone unless they have to, and then it's forced curiosity, because they have to solve however their comfort zone was messed up, so to go back into a new comfort zone maybe. And so in a more abstract sense, I call this a directed inquiry pump. So it has a direction. It does not assume anything. It's constant inquiry, and it's a pump. It's constant, meaning once you're in a comfort zone, you start leaving the comfort zone again. You pump yourself from comfort to uncomfort, or discomfort, and back to comfort. And we have that in us. If you see children play, we know that.
Yes.
But we stop playing. Right? So maybe playing is something that helps, right? Acting as if to try out, like you were describing earlier, with taking a small step out of your comfort zone, and then a bigger step. You're actually enacting what it might be outside of that.
Yeah.
And you're expanding your horizon a little bit.
But then you need to be first in contact with yourself, and know where your comfort zone is, and know when you step a little bit over it, and know when you step too much over it. And that's I think if you sense that in yourself, these steps are easier.
I agree, but I'm searching for innate capabilities for that. So let's take food.
Then your curiosity is I think your innate answer that you just gave. Curiosity is the trigger to, and you can facilitate. As a teacher, I always try to facilitate a learning and a learning process by creating curiosity.
How do you create curiosity?
By setting the stage in such a way that I always say I can't teach you anything, because you place what I'm teaching you into your context, into your epistemology, ontology, etc. And that doesn't have to mean that doesn't mean that what I'm thinking that you're learning is what you're learning. So creating that learning environment where curiosity pops up means that you just, if I want to teach them something about nature, I choose a spot where your eye is. For example, last time I did it, it was in you had a meadow, and you had a little bit of a low shrub, and then you had a big tree. But one of those trees was really really beautiful tree, but it was like it had a rough life. But that triggers your eye immediately when you're sitting there. So I placed my students in such a way that they could see it. And then and then the only thing I was doing, like, I want to go over that way. We have to go into that piece of forest over there. Just go. All of them came to that tree.
Okay.
And then there was a reason, because that tree had a nest of a black woodpecker in it, because I knew that. And then there's a lot of information on the soil and the ground, etc., around it, and you can tell about how the mushrooms and all these things are connected with us, and what we do with it, what we can do with it. So that there's this relation. But it's the first trigger is that tree, because you're placing it, and they will go there. Or you're sitting somewhere, and the last time I went out there was a sea eagle flying over us. That triggers. So then I changed my entire teaching immediately. So I always use nature time, and I never use clock time.
And how do the students respond to that, or how do you fit that into the schedule of the teaching? because
Well,
that works on clock time.
the difficulty is that the system where you're teaching is a system which is quite rigid, because it's the school system that we know. So when you're saying that this is the curriculum, I always say this is the curriculum, but I can't tell you when we're going to do what. I can tell you that we're covering everything. They're not giving you a plan because that's impossible. So for students, a lot of them, the first time, like, and then after a year, they say, now I get what you're doing. I get it. You ask us to search for certain buds from a certain tree because you want to make something of it, and you let us go without telling you what we have to look for. Yep. And some of you came back with the wrong ones, indeed, and we used that stuff also. Yes, we did. But now I know. I said, I know one thing for sure. Of all the things that I ask you to look for, you know when you're driving around where it is. If I would have told you that, it would go into your mind, and it will be out in a second. So I think it's a lot about facilitating their curiosity. Same thing applies for them. I want them intrinsically motivated. That means, what do you want? Where do you want to stand within 2 years? And I don't care what it is, if it fits in the curriculum or not. Where do you want to stand? Okay, that's what you want. Okay. How can you facilitate that to get there? And then if you know yourself. And what I see is that all of my students are motivated at that moment. Because they are going from what they want. And not from what the system wants from them, the school system wants from them. And that facilitates learning. As you start cooking things up, like certain root systems, and then you explain to them that if you do that, you have to harvest it, but you also have to leave the seeds and then the combination. But then there are a few roots that are boiled and they're laying down there. Can I taste one? Of course you can taste one. That's why it's there anyway. Didn't tell you. Oh, wow, this tastes completely different. This tastes completely different. Oh, man. Hey, why does this taste different? That's a good question. Look in the landscape. Why does this root taste different than the other one? It's the same plant. Where is this one picked? That's over there. Where's the other one picked? That's over there. Oh, wait a second. That one is more in the shade. That one is less in the shade. That one is hey. And I'm not teaching. They're teaching themselves. And then they're learning.
Okay.
But it's tough because people expect you to be a teacher. So you have to be the one who's telling everything, which is not the case.
The way I try to solve that for myself is when I'm in a teaching situation, I give them process. So, for example, there's a course I'm doing at a business school. It's about it's called Managing the Future, which is a slightly ridiculous title, but what I let them do is, in small groups, in the best case, have a dinner. I don't know if it works this year, but have a dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Is everything good, or
Yeah, it's fine. Just checking out something because I heard something, but it's okay. Sorry.
So have a dinner with a small group, and then introduce themselves to the others by describing how they want to be seen by the loved ones at the end of their life.
Yes.
And it's the loved ones. It's not the New York Times or your Twitter account, but it's that's a different story. Yes. And then if you ensure that the first one really goes deep and makes him or herself vulnerable, it's an explosion of a conversation. It's incredible what you hear, and this opens their mind. So giving them little processes like this, where they still think, okay, there's this authority that has told us to do this, but they're completely doing it themselves. So it's very similar to what you're doing there.
And I love that one because they then feel also connected to each other.
To each other, and they some for the first time think about what actually constitutes a good life or a good future. That is not trivial. That is a really, really hard question. And then moving into that and giving them, building the next process on top of that, towards then saying, okay, finding out what is the one thing you can do right now that starts bringing you into that future. And then suddenly you have that time, right? Suddenly they have the will to ask the difficult question, the will to step outside of your comfort zone. So I totally agree that it starts with the individual, but at the same time, I ask, I mean, what you do and what I do, it doesn't scale, right? And we have to get, I don't know, a couple of 100 million across the hump to move anything.
Yes, tipping point needs to be around that. Yes.
And but then I'm the way Tyson puts it is, when I point this out, is I just give them a little time, you know, they'll figure it out. When I say that Westerners, white male Westerners, have screwed up the situation, and it's just a tiny portion of the overall population, right? The species is so much bigger. So how about the others just start ignoring them and let them do their thing, right? You know, that would be fun.
That would be good.
And that is by the way one of the purposes of the African endeavor that I'm running, to stop Africa delivering stuff to the rest of the world, right? And just care for themselves. Then we have to do our own bananas and coffee and cacao and whatever. And so that would be fun. So do we really need to bring a couple of hundred people over the hump, or do we help the 80% that should not even go onto the hump that we have to get the other ones over? How do we help them climb a totally different mountain? Do a totally different, play a totally different game than the one we're playing, which is failing. Because that could be so much stronger, helping billions thrive, rather than educating millions to do something differently.
Good question.
I don't know, but that's where I land when I think about this stuff.
It's a question that I always, for me, at a certain moment in time, is, for me, it was like, if I can get people to reconnect with themselves and with their place, and if everybody does that all over the world, those who want that, I think you have your tipping point.
I agree.
Because people want to reconnect with their place. I sense it everywhere. Today, this morning I was with in the shop, and for no reason we started to talk about nature, wolves, etc. And just that talk was enough for a person to change their perspective. Get side. There was enough for a person to change the perspective about the nature, because she was going like, oh wow, I never heard that one before. That changed my way of thinking. Oh wow, and that's I think that's those little steps are the ones that we need, because those steps are the ones that are reconnecting people with their environment. So for me, at a certain point in my life, I thought, if I can get people to reconnect with their place where they're living, that's the major step. Because what I see in modern people is that they're moving around a lot. 2 years here, 5 years here, but you can connect to the place where you are. And if you learn how to do that, it gives you also the peace of mind that a lot of people crave. And that's the personal incentive at that moment. That makes a change. But that's my opinion.
I think a clear understanding of your dependency on the immediate surroundings also helps.
Yes.
So you probably noticed this looks like a ship. It is a ship. And living on a ship basically forces you to build your own island, right? You have to be, you can moor somewhere and have a water coming in and black water coming out and electricity coming in, but you can also be autonomous, right?
Yes.
And so we have wastewater treatment here. We can filter our own water out of the river. We have solar, all of these things, and there are several reasons why I'm doing this as a project, but one of them is to really get a first-hand visceral experience of what it means to live embedded and deeply dependent on the surrounding environment. Because if you're basically drinking the same water that came out of you, which in a way we're doing, right? Our wastewater, once it's clean, goes out, and that's where we get our drinking water. Then you start taking care of it in a different way.
I agree.
And so once people start noticing the brittleness of the infrastructure of a city, which some got a sense of during COVID, that will be a massive tipping point. So when electricity or water, or just electricity, breaks down everything else, the time for people to notice that they're really dependent is about a day.
Yeah, that's quick.
And what then, right? Then those who can get in a car and get out of the city, because why? Because there you're embedded. So they follow that. I'm 100% convinced, because if you know you will be running out of food, there's no water going out or in of your apartment, there's no reason to stay, right?
You go and look, yeah.
And these experiences will be probably almost inevitable in the midterm future, when just imagine a heat wave, everybody switches up their cooling systems, boom, power out. And then what? So I think building these islands, these examples of okay, this is how you could do it, spreading that knowledge and being ready for the moment when that happens, is a bit like that falling in love situation, right? Everything's there. You're having these encounters, you're preparing, and then it happens and you're ready, and the chemistry changes.
Well, I'm a little of an idealist in the sense that I think if people realize that they're related to everything else, that we don't have to have it come to a point that far. I do believe that if people are able to, I believe that you're right, correct. Because I know, looking at people, that's what I said. I'm an idealist. I like to think positive in that sense. And you're also thinking positive. But I think if you understand that you are closely related to all of these things around you, and that you interact with each other, you know, you breathe the air given to you by the plants surrounding you. That mice, if you have a mouse, the DNA of that mouse is like 92%, I believe, similar to yours. So when you put a trap outside, you're actually killing your nephew, more or less. If you see that as a relationship, and if you look from that kin-centric perspective, for me, I'm related to everything around me. I feel attracted to some things more than others,
Mhm.
but I feel related to everything around me. I'm built out of the same atoms. I mean, if I eat something from my garden, that stuff is in me, and I give something back to it
Mhm.
from me.
Mhm.
So it's a continuous relationship that I have with my direct environment. And if people can restore that, and you can even do that on a balcony. I mean, it's
Mhm.
not like you can't do it in the city, because you
Mhm.
can.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then you start to feel at home.
Mhm.
And if you feel at home, that's what you need.
Mhm.
People, I think most people are they say they feel at home at their house, but they're always changing their house, so they're not feeling at home at their house, but they wouldn't have been changing it.
Mhm.
Um, and home is their house. No, it's not, because you're always changing your internal and external things, and you're always changing it. So when you feel at home and you know you're at home within the land where you're living, then you're there.
Mhm.
Because you that's, yeah, for me, that's something that's paramount, because then you are connected in such a way that there is no barrier between you and the rest, because that's what we've been doing the last couple of let's say, since Scala Naturae from Aristotle. I mean, he started with it. He started to put that difference in us, like, yeah, we are, right? So you're actually, um we're blocking the relationship that we should have with our environment because of all kinds of reasons. When you start to feel them again, you're feeling at home, and when you're at home, you change, and your environment changes,
And you know it, right?
and you know it
It's
exactly.
immediate. Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm. And I think we even know it before.
you sense it.
Yeah. So, I mean, people just have to go out once into nature, and and it feels different immediately, right? So we're hardwired for being there.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
But
Yeah.
we have lost the relationship with it, because we look at it from, this is nature and this is us, and we forget that we are nature. We're not different than, I'm not different than a mouse. I'm not different than a cat, than a plant, than a mushroom. I'm the same, in the sense
Well,
that,
I, li-
go
I
ahead.
like I like picking up on that idea that you had earlier about the connection, and connecting with another being. For example, a fox or a bird, but there was a thing going around, I think 2 years ago. Um, I don't know where it went, but whether it was a hype or not, but it was people sitting in public spaces and just looking a random other person into the eye for 10 minutes or something. That creates deep connection. And just doing something like that is a super simple exercise that scales immediately, and that taps right into all of the mindfulness meditation worlds that can be very, very easily scaled,
Yes, yes,
and creates that connection that actually tells you, yeah, this is the kind of thing that feels like home.
yes,
And then adding to that, a way to say, okay, that was another person, but you can have the same with the tree over there, or you can have the
yeah,
same with some bird.
yes,
Um, Now go and try that. Use use what you
yeah,
looked that tree in the eye for a while.
yeah.
Um, that could be an intervention that really scales. That's very interesting. I'll have to think about that for a while.
Yeah, and I think that a tree is always more abstract for people, because that's a difficult thing. I always say to my students, what's the difference between a tree and me, or you? Then I get all these things, all kinds of things. And the only difference is the way the DNA is arranged.
Mm,
Because that tree has carbon, has water atoms, has all
mm,
these other things that my body is also made of.
mm,
But that tree is the same,
mm,
in a sense that it's exactly the same. So even an ancient culture, and even our culture, says that that tree is an ancestor tree because underneath there lies an ancestor, it is correct, literally, even because those substances that we're made of are in that tree. That makes it a scaling a relationship having with a tree. In the old days, people put the afterbirth underneath a tree. I know we had apple and I think it was an apple and a peach tree. I'm not sure that we put in Europe. We put that underneath a tree, and the tree was connected with you. And if something from that is underneath, then that tree has a meaning for you.
Yeah, but actually, my wife is pregnant at the moment, and we have two homes. We have this boat in Berlin, and we have another home in Costa Rica, where we have some land. She's from Costa Rica, so yes, we're going to do that. Exactly that. She's actually going to try and eat it. But if she says if she can't, if she can't, then we'll plant it.
Yeah. But that creates a relationship with your environment immediately. I think. But also, if you start looking into the eyes of the animals around you, and you start accepting them as individuals with their own needs and special things, and then if that is that creates a connection. And the first time you see it, it's a look at the little birds here. If you have a robin, the first time you see it, it's like, I don't know, you really know each other. Let's see if we could common ground. And then they start to know you, and they know you as such. The same thing like a black-titted bird knows exactly the different cats, because for one cat, he gives 3, 4, 5 different alarms behind it. And then I know that's the neighbor cat because he's hunting a lot. And if this little lady that you just saw into the picture comes in, they don't even make a noise because she never hunts. She never hunts. Okay. So they know each other very well. And they know each other also in the back. So that's the way we if you interact like that, that relationship starts to follow. And I think that's if we could do that, so bring that feeling of kingship, not only with our own kin, which means our own kids, but also with our own humans, of course, as humans, also human beings, but also to the cats, to the mice, to the insects. If you feel that same kingship, and if you have a friendship, this may sound strange, but you can have friendship with insects, you know. If some people who have those giant African snails, there was a student of mine who had one, and that snail knew exactly who she was and who somebody else was. There's a relationship there. So there are so many possibilities. Bees, if you're a beekeeper, those bees know exactly who's the beekeeper and who's somebody else. That's a relationship there. And it can go so far that you sense when they're going to swarm. If you let the nature do its thing, you sense it's going to swarm. You feel it because you have that close connection. If you have that kind of connection, I think you're changing.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
And with that, the world.
For sure, 100%. Yeah, I'll let that sink. For a while. How to create that kind of meditation practice with a living being.
Closeness,
connection and closeness, yes. And try that for a while. Maybe I'll suggest it to the students next week. So
cool.
That would be fun.
Let me know how it works out.
Yes, I will, for sure. Man, we're getting close to the hour, and
wow.
There's close to 2 hours now, but close to 1 o'clock, and I have a call coming up at 1 o'clock.
Perfect.
So I've learned a lot, and I will ponder this, and I will definitely come back to you one day. It might be slow, but for sure I'll come back. And if you're ever in Berlin, let me know. Then we can go on a track some city animals.
Oh, perfect! Love it. We'd love to do that. That would be good.
Yeah.
Great idea. Man.
It was really, really great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you too. And let's keep in touch.
We will for sure.
Hey,
Have a good
bye-bye
day.
and have a nice day, huh?
You too.
And enjoy it.
Ciao.
Ciao.